All right, and so without further ado, I want to hand it over to Wendy to introduce our panel and kick things off.
Okay. So I am Wendy Marquez. I'm on Fellow, also working with SB2 this year to work on increasing the organization's impact on the grantees and going hand in hand with that, even increasing the impact and development of you as partners. So I get the privilege of moderating the panel today with 3 people, and I also have the co-task of keeping us on time now that I've been handed it. So if my little clock goes off, it's not me being obnoxious, it's part of my job. Anyway, so let me start here with Alison. Alison gave you a good overview of herself very quickly as she came in. She created the Stanford Alumni Consulting Act, which does build teams of Stanford grads, Stanford business school grads doing pro bono work with not-for-profits throughout the Bay Area and management consulting type jobs. Then I understand you left there for a while, did some interesting things, and then came back as executive director for another 3 years. And during just that last 3 years, she worked with teams that impacted over 100 not-for-profits in their nonprofits. All that correct? Anything else that needs to go in there? Okay. Paul Work, and our next panelist. He, as he mentioned, is having to do a tough tour of duty down by the beach in Southern California, where he specializes in identifying new business opportunities and growing them into profitable organizations for high tech and healthcare, right? He has been down there acting, among those other things, as an active angel investor. And despite the distance, he has continued to be active in SB2 grantees up here, notably the Fresh Lifelines for Youth Fly. We'll be talking about that. And last but certainly not least is Nancy Cannon O'Connell. She is an executive coach and consultant bringing 20 years of management experience to your work right here for both senior management and execs. And she also is a lead partner for us here at SB2, very involved in the grantee rounds and serving right now as the National Foster Youth Action Network. Right? Okay. All right, so that's who they are, and we'll kick this right off. I'm going to ask each of you, and I think I'll start with you, Alison, if you can briefly tell us, can you each think of an experience where you were successful as an advisor, and give us each just kind of a brief overview of that situation so they can get the context, and then tell us why you think, what you think the keys were to success in that situation.
Yeah, and I have to kind of do a balance here between the conceptual and the specific, because there's sort of more conceptual things that I would like to share with people. So I guess where I wanted to start out was the ACT model was consulting and it was doing the homework. So it would be a team of 5 to 8 people who would spend 6 to 9 months with an organization doing, getting into depth and doing a lot of homework. But what I think is really interesting is kind of reflecting back on that is they would bring an enormous amount of information, recommendations, and I think value to the organization. But a lot of times it was almost too much for the organization because at the end of the period, the ACT team would kind of give it all to them, and then they'd move on to, most of the time, to something different. So I think 2 things. I think as an advisor, working with an organization over a period of time has got its own value as a model. And part of that comes from, I think that sometimes organizations have an easier time dealing with incremental change as opposed to, they would come to us with a big idea often or a big problem and be really interested in obviously getting some assistance in thinking that through. But not always have the capacity to kind of really act on it all at once. So there's a lot of value in incremental change, and there is the other thing that often happened was the organizations would come to us and say, well, we really want to scale nationally, and so here's what we want to do. We're going to start this new program in 8 different schools, and they often have very large ambitions, and it was not unusual for us to sort of say, well, we've taken a look at things, and we know this is kind of what you're really interested in doing, but before you do that, you actually, it'd probably be better if you thought about doing A, B, and C. and Lindsay alluded to that a little bit in terms of kind of thinking what they were, so that they really had a structure that was stable and sustainable, or that, again, that they thought about things in more incremental ways. So I think, the idea is that sometimes the advice that you give, it's really, it may seem very simple to you, but it can make a big difference to an organization if you kind of catch them at the right time and you don't sort of overload them with so many ideas that they're all excited, but moving forward on it is tough. One of the areas, and this has kind of come up in our earlier conversation, is that I think one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits face is the struggle between mission and financial sustainability. And they're mission driven. They often see lots of situations where they could offer help or assist. There's usually more demand than they have the capacity for. But most of them are financially constrained. And Lindsay alluded to kind of this growth in looking for opportunities to sell products or services. We always call that earned income, and we have seen more and more organizations paying attention to thinking about ways to do that. But there are a lot of organizations, particularly those who are working in the social sector, doing work that used to be called charity work, helping with people who really don't have the money to pay for the services. And they really often depend on government, foundations, and individuals. And they don't necessarily have opportunities for earned income. So I think that's a really important distinction to kind of understand where in the context. And I also think that from a financial perspective, as an advisor, it is essential that you really understand where the organization is currently getting its funding and kind of what its plans are. So really important that you have a pretty in-depth understanding of that and really push the organization. We spoke yesterday with Partners in School Innovation, and they do have a for-service model. And they do wonderful work in school districts, and they charge the districts for their consulting services. But guess what? The districts are like, they're looking at their money disappearing. They're worried about having enough money to pay teachers. And so that's clearly going to have an impact on the organization. So their funding sources are really important. And even organizations that seem, like Stanford is one of the obviously wealthiest nonprofits around, but they're a fundraising machine. So even if they have the capacity for getting money for their services, fundraising and development work is always, and knowing where that is going to come from. I think that when the ways to think about it is, I don't know if any of you worked in nonprofits, but if you come from the business sector, I think one of the most striking things for me was thinking about the fact that nonprofits, a lot of them, have to essentially raise their operating budget every year. So, you have to go out and find people, whether it's the government or a foundation or a major donor, you have to go out and sort of say, please give me money so I can continue to offer my services. And if you want to scale or grow, it's not like you can go to the local bank, and get a loan to, open a new homeless shelter. So those are all constraints that really make kind of operating in the nonprofit.
Stop you now and give. Thank you.
Oh, so you don't even get my story. Okay.
We're going to get that story in, but I've got a couple more questions for you in just a minute, so you can get to the end, okay? That's
Fair enough. So mine was my most successful experience, I think, was a little bit more tactical. And as Lindsay had mentioned, I've worked a lot with Fresh Lifelines for Youth, and I would characterize them very much as an adolescent stage organization. And I had just built a good personal friendship. I don't even call it a business relationship, a friendship with the executive director, Chris DeGannon, who's obviously a phenomenal individual. And we would just talk periodically. I would say that one of my constraints was I didn't feel like I had enormous amounts of time to devote to this, so I wanted to be as effective as I could. And just through talking, she would occasionally mention problems, some of which I would look at and go, wow, it's a tough problem, wish I could help. Others, though, I would hear something and say, wow, that's something where I could help. And in one particular case, she indicated that a lot of the people in the organization, are very empathetic, hardworking, energetic people. They want to help wherever they can. But that leads to, obviously, a lot of lack of mission focus in the organization. I said, wow, that sort of screams strategy. Strategy didn't seem like quite the right word, so we talked a little more, and we agreed to develop a fly constitution. Something that says, here's kind of what we're about, here's what we want to do as an organization. It's not immutable, but it doesn't change that easily. It's going to take a lot to change it. So that drew on something that personally, I have some background in strategy, and I'm a pretty good writer. I said, wow, that'd be fun. I took about 3 hours, whipped it out, finished it over a glass of wine, looking out at the sunset. Got up the next morning over a cup of coffee and edited it, and was done in about 4 hours. We had some back and forth, and ultimately I think we came up with something that really helped crystallize what the organization was about, and most importantly, gave the staff, once it had been socialized and they bought in and had their input, it gave people an idea of, what should we be working on? How do we make decisions on a day-to-day basis? 5 or 6 hours of my time made I think, a pretty big difference, and it was fun. And that's the thing, the biggest lesson I took away from it was find something that's fun to do.
Right.
You can't solve all their problems, find something fun.
Totally agree.
How about you?
Good. Let me give you a context for me. I've been really blessed in that I started my nonprofit volunteer work in San Diego at the Social Venture Partners chapter down there, and I spent 3 years there. So I got to work with 2 or 3 pretty interesting nonprofits, and now I've been up here for 5 or 6 years. I would say I come from the place of, we call ourselves an advisor or a lead partner or liaison, but basically the role sort of changes depending on where you walk in and who you are. Obviously, if you're a member of a team, you're sort of collectively advising. If you're a key person in the relationship, you can be anything from, essentially a nonprofit project manager for a special thing. This is sort of an example of carving out a project. A trusted advisor, which I think is a little bit what Alison was talking about, and which involves building trust and taking time to have a relationship. And then also just a neutral mediator where you're in a situation and there needs to be an outside voice helping to ask the right questions and say, could we land on a decision here? So the advising sort of has roles underneath it. One of the successes I had in this recent time is, as was mentioned, I'm the lead partner for National Foster Youth Action Network. And let me just reinforce here that when we talk about stages of nonprofits, they were in the baby stage. They are in the baby stage. It's been a while since SB2 has funded an organization that didn't exist until we gave them our money. This is a real startup. And all I did is basically I'm very committed to the concept of youth empowerment in foster care. This is what this organization does, so I put my hand up. But if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, which is on the psychological side, it's about people can't worry about self-actualization, love and marriage, and the future until they have a roof over their head and food and water. So on the Maslow's hierarchy basis, we've been looking at food and water for 2 years with the National Foster Youth Action Network. And so money, funds. I'm a real Jim Collins fan, good to great. I basically feel like if leaders can figure out their mission and keep their eyes on the ball, that's going to really help them in the early stages of their nonprofit development. And our organization had an opportunity to, I've got a few notes, so let me just think about this. We had an opportunity to move from how the Foster Youth Action Network with 1 employee, a fabulous ED, and a board of 5 people, kitchen cabinet, all came with her from past involvement with foster care. Half of the board is former foster youth, incredible, interesting human beings, and the other half are people who have worked in the movement and the foster care system and legislative advocacy, etc. So they basically came in and thought, well, we're going to just fundraise. We've got a pipeline. We're going to contact individual donors, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, you guys, leverage, leverage, leverage. What's the story? What's the point? What's the vision? So the first year I said, what's the big vision? Took 4 months for the ED to come up with a story that was longer than tomorrow or next month. Here's where we're headed. This is what we're doing. We established teams of empowered foster youth who form their own team in a local market all over the country. We've got 5 of them now. And they come through CBOs, community-based organizations. So there's a parent organization. And these youth are trained by the Action Network to do legislative advocacy, work on advocacy projects at the local area, find foster youth and create learning communities, etc. It's all about about foster youth changing the system for the people coming through the system now. It's a beautiful thing. But where do you get your money? So my thing has been focus, focus, focus. They had an opportunity to meet with an unexpected donor, Philip Bailey, who is, he's a musician, a singer, Earth, Wind, and Fire. He was a lead guy in that group and a bunch of other groups. Phil Collins, he was with for a while. And this guy is based in Pasadena. He's got a family foundation. He calls us and says, I'm interested in foster care. So Janet Knipe is the ED. She says, okay, we're going to take a couple of our youth, our trainers, our former foster youth, and we're going to go down there, we're going to spend an hour and talk with them. I said, oh, no, you're not. I said, let's start meeting every week. Let's prep. We spent about maybe altogether 15 hours meeting. The whole idea that everybody had to get on the phone once a week, spend an hour together talking about this upcoming meeting. You know, it's just the discipline of it. Then we had to prepare materials, and everybody had to practice their stuff. I did role playing with people like 3 or 4 different times. Now think about it. This is just advisory. The one thing that came in was I provided what SB2 stands for, the discipline and rigor around what are you really after here. When she walked into that room with these 2 former foster youth, who I know their tales by heart because they told me their stories several times by phone, she had a whole cascading idea about how Philip Bailey could help the National Foster Youth Action Network connect nationally, put us on his website, speak for us and about us in public settings, bring in other donors. I mean, the guy fell in love. He totally signed up. He gave them money, and he's going to become one of the people who will be a spokesperson. So all I did, honest to goodness, all I did was say, no, we will meet every week. We will meet every week. We will prepare. They had to do all the work. And as they did it, I liked it more and more, too. I knew it was going to be a good story. I didn't know it was going to be a home run, but it was great. We still need money, though, and I have cards.
Well, obviously, all 3 of you have had a great deal of success in the stuff that you've done. Sometimes things don't always go well. Maybe not through any fault of your own, maybe with just the organization. So can you all take just a very brief moment to talk about something that was really hard or tough and what we could learn from that? And so let's start with you.
Okay. So in San Diego, I was on a team, an SVP team. I was not the lead partner for a financial literacy grantee. We call them investees down in San Diego. Very much about outcomes funding in a lot of the SVPs, a little more than SV2. But if you think about what our gift is as an advisor to the grantees, it's actually going in and helping people understand what outcomes funding is, which means what are your outcomes for the funding we gave you. And if that's the only thing we end up doing for 3 years with our grantees, we give them a tremendous gift about accountability and discipline. So in San Diego, for this financial literacy grantee, it was a fiscal sponsor, which is a large multi-pronged organization who brought in a financial literacy expert organization. Financial literacy is where you conduct classes or trainings in any variety of modalities for people often in low-income communities and in low-income status who have never learned to handle money or manage money. They don't know what they've never talked to a bank. They don't know about credit cards. They don't know, a lot of them have never had a checking account, things like that. And so it's a way of, in social problem solving, it's a way to deal with an infrastructure thing. If you learn how to handle money better, you're going to be able to get reach a lot of your dreams. So anyway, SVP San Diego funded this organization. The first time we met with them as a team, 6 months into their grant, they had missed all the milestones for enrollment. At the end of the first year, they had missed all the milestones for enrollment, their optimism about attracting populations to go through the program. Because the outcome was all these people will be affected by this training, right? And they will become better with managing money, and they have fabulous lives. And they weren't getting them in, and they weren't getting them through these classes, even the online stuff. So we renewed them for the second year. We wrote the agreement for the second year, adjusted their milestones. So at the end of Q1 for the second year, I suggested that we have a difficult conversation. So the parent company came in with a couple of people. The expert financial literacy, wonderful organization came in. We all sat down, there were probably 6 or 7 people. And in an hour and a half, we talked about, you haven't hit your milestones, and you haven't got a solution for why. You've done a bunch of stuff, you've tried different avenues, you told us how you promoted, the telephone book, online promoting, radio ads. It's not working. And at the end of that conversation, imagine each of you sitting in one of those with some key people from a grantee. We decided to stop funding them at the end of the following quarter. And so I guess the learning was staying long enough to complete our mission, which is, if it's not working, essentially, let's take this money and go do something that's going to work, is basically, and God bless you guys, we love you, but we're thinking you shouldn't be doing this financial literacy stuff, because it's not working, So that was our...
Yeah, I'll focus on one where I think I did more harm than good. It was a branding exercise, again, for Fresh Lifelines for Youth, and I think ultimately it ended up with it in a good place, but Krista had asked me to help out with this. I do have some marketing background, and I kind of reluctantly said sure. It went through a very formal process, and I was participating by phone. And the bottom line was it was just a terrible fit for kind of my skills and my interests. And literally after the first couple of sessions, and I spent many, many hours on this project, I would literally sit there holding the phone, just shaking it, on mute, of course, literally uttering expletives. What the are we doing here? And, I know, although I maybe kept us off a few shoals, I know that my bad attitude came through. So if I learned one thing from that, it was, for gosh sakes, put your passion into something you really feel positive about. Don't try to force yourself, even when you know there's a need there. It was a valid project. There was good reasons for doing it. I did it just because the ED asked me, but it was a bad fit for me, and I just wish I had said, Crystal, let me help with something else first. This is just a bad fit.
This is not me. Yeah. Let me find someone else to do it. Would that have been a better solution?
Infinitely better.
Great example.
Well, sometimes we tried to give advice to people who really didn't want to hear it.
That's the only time that's ever happened.
So I'll just give you a short story for this one. So this was actually for us a relatively sophisticated client, and it was an academic institution that had developed a product that they were using for students, and they felt that it had real applicability in the corporate market, and they saw it as an opportunity to develop a revenue stream around selling this product into the corporate marketplace. And so, they felt that it had been created by a world-class expert, and it had an excellent brand, and they thought it was a niche where there wasn't a lot of competition, and so they really brought ACT in to help them kind of come up with a sales strategy. And I had the opportunity to go to the team's final presentation, where they brought in not only the people who they've been working with, but also some higher-ups in the organization who would kind of ultimately have to make the decision about resource allocation for selling this product. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with the corporate training marketplace. It's really complex.
It's crowded,
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And so the ACT team spent a lot of time sort of doing lovely kind of consultant graphs about explaining the complexity and the relationships. And they reported on conversations that they had with corporate training managers and with vendors who were in this space. And then they moved into some ideas that they had for the client, and they even actually gave them some specific ideas about partnerships. Some of the people who they'd encountered who said, hey, yeah, we'd be interested in kind of talking with you. And then they finished and kind of went for questions, and it was really fascinating to watch the senior people in the organization. All of their questions were not about kind of what they had just heard, but what they had come in already believing and thinking was the right way to deliver things. And so it was. Sometimes there are people who their worldview is just so strong and entrenched that even when they're presented with data and facts that contradict it, they can't let go. And sometimes I think if you have the opportunity to work with people over time, you can bring it up multiple times and that starts to give. But I think you also have to know when you're kind of not going to make much progress there. And even your very rational logic brain said, but look at the data, look at this.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't take it in, you're really kind of not going to go into it.
Well, you bring up a really critical point.
Great.
Given, Nancy, your role as an executive coach and that kind of thing, if someone's trying to start working with a nonprofit, and what kind of advice would you give them for just kind of initiating that relationship, or how do you know if you've walked into a wall?
Before I start, let me mention that I call what Alison was just talking about when we meet people where there's the island where everything's going to be okay. And they've got their eye out on that island and everything's going to be okay. Because, and I've talked to Lindsay about this too. And we need to know when someone is looking at that island, eyes on me. The island is actually a mirage. And we need to talk about, but yeah, people get this idea, if only we can go do that. We just sell our products into the corporate marketplace. It'll be funded forever. So this last year I was with a funder, a pretty influential funder in San Francisco, and she said to me, so SV2, you're asking nonprofits to open the curtain between nonprofits and funders. And I said to myself, wow, to the traditional funding world and to nonprofits that are out there 24/7, 365 days a year looking for money and grant writing and grant asking, we are really sort of an aberration because we want people to believe that they can trust us, that they can open the curtain. We will not take what we learn and use it against them. They will not be punished. We won't defund them next year when we say what's wrong, what's not working, tell us your story. So I think it's really important as we get started in a new relationship, or even if you're in a relationship where it feels super like arm's length, and that's sort of the dynamic that's going on. People are thinking, this isn't for real. How many people have they had say to them, we've got money for you and you can trust us and we're reliable, and then nothing happens. So we have to stay in long enough on meeting them where they are. If they're skeptical or superficial or only want to meet for an hour once a month, which we can push on, but we need to get it that it takes a little while to build a trust relationship. This is my opinion. So ask, listen, ask and listen. I'd say a lot of advisors, a lot of us as partners, when you think about where we come from, our successes in the corporate world, we're already deciding what we want to say while they're answering whatever our last question is. So the listen I put in bright red here, ask and listen 2 or 3 times before we start giving our advice and weighing in. And how great if they actually think we get where they're coming from when we start the relationship. And then I think explaining how you would like to work. I love what Paul said. I've only got a few hours a month. I've got a lot of other stuff going on. I like to meet in person, a couple hours, blah, blah. Or how about an hourly check-in once a week or whatever. Actually sort of setting up an oral contract. And, in the process of doing that, it's sort of like doing the OCAT. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens just trying to work out how will we meet, Now, a lot of lead partners only meet once quarterly and things like that. Jamie has this great quote from last year where she said, we were doing some kind of leadership stuff, and she said, it's the first time I really realized we need to be different people depending on the situation in the nonprofit. We don't always go in with the same thing. Well, when you meet your people you're working with, decide, is it once a month, once a week? I've been meeting with the Action Network pretty much once a month in person for a couple of hours. It's really deepened our relationship. Do worthwhile things that pay off. Do the Constitution for 6 hours because you love it and it's fun. They love to have something come back besides advice. Look for advice weariness. Okay, so hello, I've got a lot of advisors and no doers. So, that's the thing, you're sort of searching out how can we add value. If we stick with our knitting, we're about outcomes funding. We're about what you said you were going to do and the capacity development that we funded you to do. And how can I help you? So when I sit down, I say, how's everything going? And then I say, how are you doing on your milestones? And then I say, how can I help you? How can I support you?
Must sound like music to their ears.
Well, it takes for me, because I'm so direct and challenging, I think, I've had Janet, who is a very powerful executive director, say to me, Nancy, it is really hard to believe that you're here just to help and not to judge, So you just got to get it, that people think you're a funder, you're here to find out what's not working. Watch the pathology, I think, what's not working. What's working? What's working, and can we step off from it?
So we've got a whole room of people here that are successful, busy, used to being in things that work, or if they don't work, moving on. And I'm sure that there's several, if not a lot, in the room saying, I don't have full time to do this. I only have a couple of hours. But
Right.
I care. I've got a heart for it. Paul, can you talk about how you can make a meaningful impact when you're either at a distance or have a limited amount of time?
Yeah, and I think I've touched on a lot of it already, but much of it comes from starting by investing the time to build a personal relationship with the executive director, so that you can understand and that he or she feels free to speak with you about what your challenges and problems are. Personally, I found that a point of what I think is very high leverage is in helping nonprofits improve their kind of basic managerial capabilities. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of folks that want to come in at the board level and give kind of big picture strategic advice. I know I talked about the successful thing I was involved in is being strategy, but I really believe that the heart and soul and success of a lot of these organizations is in helping them operate more effectively and just kind of doing some of the stuff that is just absolutely basic in for-profit business. And so I've found that by spending some time on focusing on specific problems, whether it be in one case problems with multi-level management. Mm-hmm. Another case was a situation where there was clearly someone who wasn't performing, and the manager didn't have the heart to say, gee, we need to find another role or have this person move on. Sometimes with very limited focused engagement, just an hour on the phone, answering questions and being a sounding board, being an outside person for that manager, you can have a huge impact. Frankly, what I've done has been pretty random, and it has been largely in response to issues that the executive director and her team have raised. Mm-hmm. I haven't tried to come in and replace the board or say be an advisor in the sense of here's what you guys should do. When asked, I do. I ask questions and offer advice, but a lot of it's been fairly tactical, and I think that's a missing part in a lot of organizations. A lot of them just don't have the experience in managing teams, growing teams, all those things that those of us in the for-profit world taken for granted for years. So find that place that you enjoy and feel like you make a quick impact. Right. Those kinds of things, by the way, you can do over the phone. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunately been what we've had to do for the time being until we get back to the promised land up here.
You may want to do it on the phone anyway.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Because you keep talking about Fly. Can you tell me just really briefly what they do?
Yeah, sure. It's Fresh Lifelines for Youth,
okay.
and fundamentally what we do is we work with children who have already gotten in trouble with the criminal justice system, and through a combination of mentoring, and as crazy as this sounds, legal training. The founder of Fly was a Stanford law grad, and one of the things she found out when she went and talked to kids in the juvenile justice system was a lot of them just didn't understand the consequences of their actions. It sounds so basic. You're 16 and you punch a kid. Well, that's just not a schoolyard fight anymore. You hit them with a board. That's something different.
It's called assault, yeah.
And the organization, what they really do, and what I think makes so many of us so passionate about it is they say we're not going to give up on kids. I mean, they fight for the kids that have already messed up. some you can't, substance abuse, mental health, there's some issues that we don't try to tackle, but fundamentally it's about helping kids that have already messed up and saying, look, we still think there's something valuable there.
We had Krista, the ED of that, speak a couple of first
Wasn't it last?
Was it
month?
last? No, two.
Yeah,
2 months.
2 ago. It was very.
I've heard a lot about her. And
It's
orientation.
on-
She's really.
Everyone's always telling me she's
phenomenal.
the guru and she's the best,
She
but I
really
didn't
is,
quite
yeah.
get what she did.
It was really impactful. So just before we open it up to the group talk, I mean, you've seen hundreds of nonprofits that act and you yourself have helped with. Have we missed anything in terms of how to advise them? Any last nuggets of advice? Any
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to say is something that we basically tried to kind of orient all of the consultants coming into ACT, since all of them were really coming from for-profit backgrounds, and that was helping them understand the difference in the culture between nonprofits and for-profits, and in particular that nonprofits tend to be very consensus-oriented, and so it's not like the leader can just sort of announce, oh, well, now we're going in this direction, and everyone will follow. So things have to happen kind of at all stages of the organization, and people need to be involved in a process. And so one of the things that I think would be really useful for someone who's operating as an advisor is to also take some time and, yes, developing a relationship with the executive director. It's a trusting and personal relationship is critical, but also taking some time to get to know some other people in the organization. And it can be as simple as just taking people out to coffee, learning more about what they do and kind of getting their view. I think it's really critical to at least have some conversations and introduce yourself to the board chair, and then also the person who's running development. Of course, you need to let the executive director know that you're doing this, so they don't feel like you're undercutting them. But I just think kind of broadening your view and also reaching out, and that's really meaningful to people that you're interested in learning more from them. So I just think I think that's time well invested. It'll help you understand the organization, but it'll also help people understand if something is coming out of a recommendation or some work that you're doing, that you're not kind of doing it in a vacuum.
I think those are useful tips for doing the kind of stuff that Nancy's talking about in terms of building that trust. And I think that speaks to us making sure we understand what our mission is. And so, when you go in, the first thing you say is, "I'm not after your job." Or in the corporate world, that's what you'd say. So, well, these have been really, really helpful comments, and I know that we have a number of partners and other people in the room that have also had significant advising experience in one role or another. So, I'd like to open it up both to questions, and if you have a short experience you'd like to share or additional points to make, please share them with the group. It looks like we've got a good group. Yeah.
Just to add on to the ACT, because I've been in ACT volunteer for times, that often what I found is, ACT is a definite project, like a 6-month project, that they might have down on the paper that our issue is X, and quickly we find out it will be Y.
Right.
And I think in talking to more than just the ED or whoever it is that comes to us, to talk to more people to kind of get a bigger sense. Not to totally ignore what they say, this is what we want you to help us with.
I think there's actually an advising role too in the organizations that we don't fund. And sometimes you get to this transition where you have to tell them, here's why we didn't fund. And there's an opportunity there where you can pinpoint exactly what you see as what you have to approach. And I think that can be one of the most challenging pieces of communication, because on one side you're giving them bad news, or potentially bad news, and then on the other hand you're saying, well, here's what we saw. And so delivering that with a kind of a nice touch can be really important, but it also has to be poignant and effective in steering them in the right direction. So just as kind of that.
Nancy, you said that I was kind of stirred by, I guess, is when you said that sometimes people in nonprofit would assume that a funding source would be trying to find out what's wrong, and I kind of, again, from the for-profit perspective, I can relate to that in terms of the VC trying to find out what's wrong with his investment so they can get a really slamming term sheet on the guy. Knowing all
Exactly.
the things. What's the incentive? I don't understand why a funder would be trying to do that with a nonprofit organization they fund. Like, what's the culture there that they would even expect it?
You know, it's great, the 101 on philanthropy, because I came into this too because I was out of the corporate world and I wanted to sort of give back. But I never really knew a lot about traditional philanthropy. You know, I was in a community foundation with SVP in San Diego, and I've learned things. But, you know, traditional funders, they don't visit. They don't come in. They don't do site visits. You send them a letter or respond to an RFP or whatever. They have expert project officers who get to know the ecosystem of the, you know, little kids or whatever. But they really stay away from the organizations. Some of them are becoming hybrids, but you know, the very idea, hey, we're going to give you our time and our money. And we're going to come in, and by the way, here, fill out this SurveyMonkey instrument in order to start the check. It is really just about that many traditional organizations have not had intimate relationships with their funders.
And if
They're just sort of inherently suspicious of something.
Yeah, well,
No,
Well,
I
it's
don't think
the
it's
concern that they would not then, you know, fund.
right.
It's
So
more
the
the
issue-
paranoia
right.
on the nonprofit side.
Right.
So in the traditional ecosystem, if a funder visited, it's a bad sign.
No, I just meant we're inventing a lot of it's a new pattern that, honestly, this woman who was talking to me, she said, Nancy, I think they're just perfectly happy with the current system. You know, they've got their world, they've got their lives. They're used to writing a renewal letter 2 months before the end of the year. And so that's why I love the idea of pulling the curtain across and looking together. We have to say, hey, you know, we want to partner with you.
I'd like to add that for agencies that get government funding,
Mhm.
it's usually for a particular project, and the government agencies can really be nickel and diving organizations. And when they ask for questions, they want to find reasons not to pay in full or pay late.
Later.
In a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
cases.
After.
And so there's a natural suspicion, particularly under social safety net organizations, to hide a little bit.
Yeah.
You're not
Exactly.
going to tell them, oh yeah,
Put
we
on a
have a
face.
problem with this, because they say, oh, well, we're not going to pay for it.
Yeah, it's so helpful, Jamie. Yeah.
The other dynamic that we see is usually the relationship with the potential funder is one of show me how great you are
Right.
so that we can give you money so you can do more greatness. Capacity building is far too rare in the funding model.
Mhm.
And so I think most people aren't used to saying, you're giving me this money so that I can get better,
Yeah.
as opposed to just doing more replicating. And most of what they're just inundated with, if they ever meet somebody with money, it's a show-off session so that they can give you money so you can do exactly that for more kids or more schools or more whatever.
Right.
And so they're usually selling,
Mhm.
not inviting partnership to improve. It's not a development conversation.
I guess those funding sources don't actually help their fundees very much, do they?
Well, wouldn't you say it's more that they're entrusting the organizations to do all that work themselves? I mean, we did originate from the VC idea that we can really help you do it better, faster, and at a much larger scale if we get in there and sort of let you skip all the big problems and avoid the landmines. Yeah, so I would say traditional funders are more about and that's one of the things that we often hear. You are the experts. They are the experts on what they do. So we have to go hat in hand and say, you know, you guys are like the experts at this. We know how to do this other stuff that maybe we could add value. But
Right, and I actually think there's an SB2 action item out of this, which is there's an awareness and comprehension problem.
Yeah.
In that I don't think the marketplace knows writ large the difference between a grant request from us guys, I guess, and somebody else. And so, you know, to see and recognize that this isn't just one of the 3 grants I'm writing this week and say, well, this is different.
Yeah.
I think there's some work to be done.
Amen. Very helpful.
Setting their expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Right.
coming in a different way.
Because all nonprofits would want it, I would think. I mean, if you are a nonprofit that wants to sustain and grow, who wouldn't want a team of experts coming in and helping you after they give you the money?
Mhm.
It's like Christmas every day. Just sounds so good.
Julie.
There's also suspicion of you coming in and dictating how the organization's in.
Right.
And It's because there have been funders. I know Downtown College Prep, that I was the lead partner for one of our early grantees, very early on turned down a grant from a local funder. It was quite substantial because he wanted to dictate what the curriculum was, what books that she was going to buy. And she said, no. You know, and this was not an education expert. He had, some specific ideas and stuff, and she said, great, I appreciate your interest in our organization, and we'd love to work with you, but we make the decisions.
Hey guys, I thanks, Jamie, and I just want to say, not for a minute do I want the word like suspicion or any of that to be in this conversation. That is certainly nothing I have encountered. It's more that nuance of understanding when we barge in like a bull in a china shop and we're so excited to get right in there that they're not quite as excited until they have a relationship with us. It's really more about educating them about, why we're here, and what we know that could add value. And that actually does take some conversations. They start thinking, hey, you sort of know some stuff that I haven't had time to learn about.
It's difficult to communicate the landscape and not sound like here's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those practical things.
Go with who you are as people. It always works the best.
Well, and from the people I've seen in the short time I've been with SB2, there's very impressive people. Everybody's heart's in the right place, and it's just a wonderful opportunity. I think it seems to be very fulfilling as a partner and for the grantees as well. So I would not want anyone to be worried about even stepping up in whatever way you can. That's why we're changing some of the structure so that there are lead partners that take the primary responsibility of being the liaison between SB2 and the grantee, but then also this advising team, which allows anybody to become involved and step up in whatever capacity they're doing, so that we can benefit from whatever skills, whatever time, whatever passions you have to contribute to that grantee.
I just would strongly encourage everyone to take a little baby. If you haven't done it, take a little bite. Try a little baby step. Find a 5-10 hour project. You'll be astounded, I think, if you haven't done it, at how much impact you can have in that limited amount of time, and how darn rewarding it is. I mean, it is so much. I think for me, and I think many of us, it's so much more rewarding personally and emotionally than writing a check. I mean, you maybe feel good about both, but give it a try.
I think on that, as a lead partner, if you can help the nonprofit organization break down what they're trying to do into smaller projects, you'll be able to get more people on the consulting assignments. They don't understand exactly how to break that down into small bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, that's true.
Any comments?
Well, one of the things that I think is great about having an advising team is that it just basically kind of broadens the expertise that you make available. And I think, again, I'm new, so I don't know if this exists, but I think it would be also great for us as lead partners and advising team also to know about some of the other backgrounds and skills. So if, say, the nonprofit we're working with has got some questions about HR, maybe there's someone who has a background in that, or legal, or so being able to access other partners who aren't even associated, but can come in and have a conversation and at least help the organization sort of get some ideas of what's next in terms of they should be thinking about their resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Lindsay would agree with this. We view the partners as resources to each other, partners to resources to the grantees, and the grantees as a resource and a way back to the partners too, in terms of both the emotional fulfillment and the professional training in terms of working with nonprofits. And it just kind of seems like a win-win all the way around. And we're talking about how to structure those types of organization of interactions where an advising team for one group can meet with an advising group for another, or how do we get this cross-pollination going on, and as well as making everybody aware of what the grantees are doing throughout the year, because it's pretty exciting stuff. You go into any one of them, you go, oh, I could work there. Oh, I should help them with that. It's hard to know because they're also worthwhile.
I'll make one quick comment on fundraising, because I know that's something that's of interest to everyone. I would, and it also ties into this following what you love doing. I mean, for some people, it's relatively easy to pick up the phone and call their friends and try to solicit money and do the kind of the hardcore fundraising. For others, that just sounds like, life living hell. There's a lot more to fundraising, obviously, and I just encourage people to think more broadly about fundraising. There's a lot more to it than picking up the phone. And so if you have an ability to, for example, help the grantee come up with some very compelling stories of people that they've helped, or figure out some way to position what the organization does better. You may say, look, I'm not comfortable making phone calls. That's just, I don't feel comfortable yet doing that. But there's a lot of other steps that are involved. Maybe you're very quantitative, and maybe pulling some data together about your empirical results that you've had in the organization could ultimately help them generate funds. So I just encourage everybody to think broadly about what fundraising might mean and how you can possibly help.
I actually had a recent experience with that, and it was an organization that my friend is starting, and she's looking for funding. And I'm not really comfortable approaching anybody in particular, but I can help you identify where the areas, the key buckets you want to be looking for, where you can really focus on how you can look at your strategy and look for different funding mechanisms to achieve that strategy. So I think there's multiple layers and aspects to deal with that.
Right. Yeah, and I'm a strategy person, and this little story I told earlier, all I did with Janet was say, what's your big vision? And that's what she used her deck from the sort of the top line strategy to tell her story. But I don't know anything about fundraising really. So one of the things that stepping off of what you said, Paul, that I learned from Steve Tobin. He's the CEO or the ED of the Flora Family Foundation, which is a Hewlett Family Foundation, and he works with grant makers around the Northern Cal, and he came up with this graph. And maybe I've shown it to some of you, but I had never understood that grant makers actually have stages of, the life cycle. And I don't know, if it's something for us as partners to understand that in early stage, we got an angel funder here. Well, there are grant makers like Draper and Ashoka and these guys who fund like super early stage, right? And then there's mezzanine funding, and then there's the big guys. Well, I go into my nonprofit, organizations or like the National Foster Youth Action Network, and she's got this big list of grants that she's looking for, and she's got all the big guys over there. And now I know from Steve, and I shared this with her, those guys, guess what? They won't even entertain a grant until you are X, until you've got X scale and you've done X. It's really mainly about budget size for the most part. And they started divvying it up. And Steve Tobin actually said SV2 could play a role in helping organizations to find baton handoffs where you're stuck in this little stage of funding. So what we've started doing with the Foster Youth Action Network is we tell our key donors, and like this guy Philip Bailey and some other high net worth individuals that we're talking to, and the Stewart Foundation funds them, we tell them this is our state, we're in this stage, we need bridge funding to get over here. Because when we get over here, look at all the guys who fund foster care stuff in this space. So I think as partners, we may not be good at fundraising or interested in it, but being able to bring that kind of thinking that some of them don't actually have yet, even though they might be far along as organizations. So.
Well, it looks like we either need more caffeine or we need to wrap up. So just thank you all three of you for coming to
Good job, Linz.
Oh, not at all. So we, in the survey that I'm going to send out, we are going to ask about other professional development